I don't know what is happening here.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Treeshakers show. Today, we have with us Mr. Kevin Peterson. Woohoo! I said I'm going to get some background hand clapping because definitely this is a hand clapping, tree shaking moment. Mr. Kevin Peterson, wow, one of the leaders in Boston. You're doing some phenomenal work there, sir. Let's have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are as an individual, and then we'll talk about the organization. Are you the founder of your organization also?
Yes, yes. I am the founder of the New Democracy Coalition. You find us on the web at www.democracycoalition.org. It is an
Wait, that didn't
organization
come
that
through real
focuses.
clearly. I'm gonna try to wait, 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 wait.
Hmm,
Hold up a second. Let's hold up a second. Let's restart this.
sure.
Okay. Okay.
This might be better to do it this way.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the
Fix that a little
Treeshakers
bit
show.
anyway.
Today we have with us Mr. Kevin Peterson. Woohoo! Woohoo! Good morning, Kevin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing good, thank you. It's such a pleasure to talk with you again, my brother. Let's tell folks who you are. Let's tell folks about who Kevin Peterson is.
Okay. Kevin Peterson from Boston, founder and director of the New Democracy Coalition. You can find us on the web at www.newdemocracycoalition.org. We focus on civic engagement with a specific emphasis on engaging people in the African American community, communities of color, Black people, around issues related to democracy and community development. So our organization focuses on three things, Kim. One is civic policy, the other is civic literacy, the other is electoral justice. Our
Mm.
civic literacy work engages in activities where we seek to increase people's knowledge about democracy and about community engagement. The more you know about democracy and about voting, the more likely you are to do it, participate. Then we focus in the area of civic policy. And in the past has been our work related to redistricting. Our organization, New Democracy Coalition, created the first African American congressional district in the city of Boston some years ago. We've also done work around the census count, and we've done some legislative work around creating a reparations commission in Massachusetts. That's our civic policy work. And then we do work around electoral justice. So every year at the polls, we work with the Urban League here and the NAACP here locally in Boston around protecting people's votes at the polls. African Americans are more likely, and African Americans and poor people, sometimes they're the same group, they're more likely to be disenfranchised at the polls, to be misdirected at the polls, to be given misinformation at the polls and out on the opportunity of voting. So New Democracy Coalition in Boston, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, focuses around electoral justice. Those are the three main areas that we work around every year. We engage students at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, but we're also a coalition of grassroots organizations, faith-based organizations, and we connect with organizations across the country on different initiatives.
Wow. And I know that folks who listen regularly to the Tree Shaker show, they are not going to be surprised that we are friends because we are doing some of the same work here in New Orleans, and so now we are also branching out across the state. Have you all done similar type work across the state of Massachusetts also, or is it just in Boston?
Well, yes, we do statewide work. I referenced our work around redistricting.
Yeah.
Uh, so about 8 years ago, after the census, we've just taken another census, but the census before, our organization was engaged in creating um, 10 new legislative districts that are so-called majority minority. So these are Africans or
Wait, we got
Latinos
a little. We having a
are
little
the
bit of.
majority of the population.
We having a little bit of static, and it's not clear. Can you repeat that again, please?
Okay. Yes, I said that we were. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. I said that we have been doing statewide work throughout our existence, and our major victory in terms of state work has been the redistricting process 8 years ago, where we created 10 new legislative districts across the Commonwealth that gave advantages to so-called majority minority populations, Black populations, Latino populations in the Commonwealth. We increased those number of seats by 100%, those legislative seats. And as I
Wow.
mentioned, we created the first, Black congressional district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So our work extends from Boston across the Commonwealth, and we're so proud of the work that we've been doing.
So am I. So am I. Kudos to you, man, for doing the work, because I know how hard it is,
Yeah,
right? Now,
yeah.
I'd like for you to tell my listeners about some of your the some of the taking down of the Confederate monuments, particularly your campaign on the Fannie Lou Hall. Can you tell
Hmm.
my listeners about what that is?
I, I I love to do it. And our effort around changing the name of Faneuil Hall is so inspired by what's been happening in your city, in New Orleans. We model our efforts. We take inspiration from activists such as yourself and many others. I know that it's a collaborative effort in the city, but our interest has been changing the name of Faneuil Hall, as it is named after a slave owner, a person who participated in the slave trade. His name was Peter Faneuil, and his name adorns one of the oldest and most iconic buildings in the city of Boston. In fact, the building was constructed before the nation was founded in 1742, named after Faneuil Hall, as Peter Faneuil. As I say, he was a slave owner.
Yeah.
It is a publicly owned building, and so as we in Boston have noticed that in cities like Charlottesville and cities like New Orleans, activists have been inspired to rename these buildings and then engage in conversation around reparation and around fairness and around racial equity. We're doing the same thing here in Boston. So we are in the process of hosting hearings uh, regarding changing the name of Faneuil Hall. But Kim, more important, we're interested in having the dialogue, the conversation around race and racial division in the city so that we make improvements in terms of addressing systemic and structural racism in the city of Boston. Let me give you a couple facts. In the city of Boston currently, the net worth of the average Black family is $8. That's the net worth, $8, compared to $247,000 for the average white family. You didn't mishear
Wow.
me. This is
Wow.
a Federal Reserve study, and you think that Boston would be a place where there is racial equity and enlightenment and liberty, but you have this incredible disparity just in terms of your economic wealth and worth in the city. Again, $8 is the net worth of a Black family, average Black family, 247,000 for whites. In Boston, you're more likely, if you're a Black person, you're likely to die of health morbidities, asthma, diabetes, cancer than a white person is. You're less
Wait, how
likely to
many? What's
graduate
the
from.
percentage? What's the percentage? I'm sorry.
Well, you're more likely to die of those health morbidities than whites. So they vary. Uh, you, you're twice as likely to die of diabetes if you're Black in Boston than if you're white. Another statistic: you're less likely to graduate from high school as a Black student in Boston than a white student.
Oh yeah.
If you are a Black or Latino, if you're a Black or Latino male in Boston between the age of 18 and 36, you're more likely to be a victim of murder in the city of Boston than a white counterpart. So, Kim, all are these stick across the board where life is less valuable, white in the city, according to the statistics. And so as we talk about changing the name of Faneuil Hall, we're also trying to engage the city in the conversation around race and racial disparity so that over the long term, we address issues of structural racism. And we take that from the work that's being done in Charlottesville and Baltimore, and to a certain extent in your city, New Orleans. We're trying to raise the consciousness of people and our elected officials in order to address the issues of racial difference.
Wow. Now I believe in my heart that uh certainly we have come to a space where America as a whole has got to realize the injustices that have happened to Black people, African Americans that were
That's right.
kidnapped from their home in Africa and enslaved. And we still are
That's
suffering
right.
from that enslavement right now today. So I'd like to know, what has the Boston community been saying about this campaign to rename Faneuil Hall?
Well, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, so to speak. We have incredible support from the grassroots, from your average African Americans or Black people around town. They're supportive of the name change, and they are beginning to see that as we look at changing the names of streets and changing the names of buildings that are named after white supremacists, we could also have this larger conversation. Our difficulty, quite frankly, has been with our elected officials. We have a majority of the city council in Boston who are people of color, and majority women. Yet we've taken this issue around holding a hearing around the name change and having this conversation about race. We've taken it to them and they've rejected it. They don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to have the dialogue. In some ways, we understand why they don't want to have the dialogue, because it is a difficult and painful process to go through. And it's a risky process to go through in terms of discussing publicly the issues of around racism and racial disparity in a city, as you know, Kim, that has a history of racial problems. We talk about busing in Boston in the past. You may remember the famous Charles Stewart murder in the 1990s in the past, where white man accused a Black man of murdering his wife and his white wife and his baby. It was a national story. So Boston has a bad track record, quite frankly, around race. Not so much different than some cities in the South.
You're right. And I know
Of,
I looked at
racial
disparity. I looked at Dr. King's work in Chicago. And
yes.
that that really, the paradigm has already been set that it's not just the South, and it's just a misconception. But the thing about it that Dr. King opened us up to was that in the South, you have more people who realize that it's wrong and more people who are willing to fight because they
Hmm.
realize it's wrong. But in other areas of the country, people try to pretend like that's not even an issue. Still today from the 60s, and this is where we are now, still facing the same systemic issues, you know.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
um,
I
and
mean, one of the misnomers we have about cities in the South, particularly Boston or Massachusetts, is that there isn't a deep-seated legacy of slavery.
like there
Well,
isn't a deep seated
Massachusetts was
legacy
one
of
of the
what?
first colony, a deep of slavery or enslavement.
Uh
People
huh.
don't realize that, or there's a misconception that Massachusetts, for example, was one of the first colonies to legally adopt slavery. One of the first colonies to make it part of its law, its legal infrastructure. We know that the initial group of slaves sort of landed in Jamestown in 1619. But in Massachusetts, the laws around slavery were created in the 1620s, not too long after those slaves landed in Jamestown. So people make the assumption that Massachusetts or Boston is a liberal place, or that it has a history of being a place of equality or liberty, when in fact it has a legacy around anti-Black oppression as much as cities and states in the South. And it's been difficult um, to communicate even to Bostonians that the slave trade undergirded the economy in Boston, and that the legacy of the slave trade or enslavement still impacts the everyday life of Bostonians, including Blacks. I mentioned those statistics to you just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
We contend that those horrible statistics are not separate from the long historical legacy of anti-Black racism in Boston, and it's our commitment. It's our commitment to address those issues, to have public dialogue about it, in order to get to reparations, in order to get to reconciliation, racial reconciliation. That's the goal.
Wow, that is a
Hmm.
noble, noble, noble charge, and one that's so desperately needed. And I'm hoping that folks can hear you today and be willing to reach out to their loved ones all across the country,
That's right.
you know, because this is not something that's going to go away, and it's not going to happen without us standing up. We cannot expect that those who have gained the most. And it looks to me like white people in Boston, the white citizenry in Massachusetts
Hmm.
is benefiting from that economic disparity. And really, I just can't see how we can continue to try to move forward where we are so marginalized into the worst uh, uh, sector
Well,
to
we
be
we, we
whole.
certainly right. We certainly cannot move forward. That is why it's so important to have the dialogue. What I've seen or witnessed in New Orleans is an awareness come about by Blacks and whites, as you've been discussing the pulling down the monuments. I
The
know there are more
Confederate monuments.
monuments that need to
Yeah.
come down,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the Confederate monuments, yes. And I know that there are streets across the city of New Orleans that are potentially going to be changed.
Yeah.
Um, those acts are very, very important. because they raised the consciousness of everyday people in your city about the legacy of racism and how that legacy needs to be addressed and how it needs to be attacked. And if we do not have the dialogue, I've been looking into the transcripts, for example, of the debates in New Orleans around the street name changes. I've been looking at how your city councilors and that commission has been talking to each other and how it is raising consciousness about the need for equity and equality in New Orleans. We want to replicate that energy and that process that's going on in your great city, a city that's produced so much for the nation, just in terms of its cuisine and in terms of its music.
Yeah,
it is also producing. It's also producing something in contemporary times that the whole nation could benefit from.
yeah.
We know, for example, that New Orleans has given much to the nation in terms of its civil rights history.
Yeah.
So we know about Plessy versus Ferguson,
Mm-hmm.
and we know about the legacy of Ruby Bridges, and we know about the Woolworth protests there on Canal Street. And I know you're connected to that movement.
The very front of the historic New Orleans French Quarter, which continues. I tell you, when I was listening to the descriptions on Faneuil Hall and the New Orleans French Quarter,
Mm-hmm.
it almost blew me away, Kevin, because they have
it is so
much
similar
in common, like a baseball fits inside of a baseball glove, all encompassing the very same language, sir. And it really shook me,
mm-hmm.
even at this point, how we have to be cognizant all across the country of these areas of Mecca wealth in our communities where people of color have been left out. And I am often at a space where I feel like whether it's intentional or not, the outcome is still the same and it's still wrong. So
that's right.
Your silence from our leadership is complacency. It means that whether you intentionally support it or not, your silence is supporting it. You are, even when you're not saying something, you're saying something.
That's right. And yes, you make a wonderful comparison. When I visit New Orleans and go into the French Quarter, it's almost lily white.
Oh yeah.
Owned by white people. The money is white money, so to speak. White people control the French Quarter. That is very similar to our Faneuil Hall.
Yeah.
Let me give you one striking example about Faneuil Hall. There is connected to Faneuil Hall what's something called Quincy Market.
Yeah.
Where there are concessions and business. There are 147 businesses and shops in the Faneuil Hall complex. None are Black owned. In a city that's 33% African American.
That's what I wanted to know.
None are Black owned. Now, there's 33% Black in Boston. People will be surprised at that high number. But here in this complex, this Faneuil Hall complex that's owned by the public, there's not one Black-owned building, not one Black-owned business. Yes, Faneuil Hall is owned by the city.
Yeah, we can't have that. We can't have that.
So we have this racial economic apartheid at Faneuil Hall, and it's endorsed. It's endorsed and it's perpetuated by city government. Our Black elected officials allow it to happen. Our white mayor, who was just recently confirmed to be the new labor secretary in the Biden administration.
That's
He
funny. That's
condoned
real
that kind
funny.
of racial apartheid.
That's real
Yeah,
funny. Because
it
guess
is.
what? I swear, that's comical. It's really comical. And then it's a bad look to the president of the United States. It's a bad look when we continue to promote those who have been at the lead in our disparities. They cannot continue to receive promotions. Cannot. We cannot tolerate that
That's absolutely that's it.
as citizens of these United States.
We cannot, and we need to communicate that. We in Boston, in particular, need to communicate that to the Biden administration. That to a very significant degree, his choice for the Secretary of Labor, Mayor Marty Walsh, the former mayor of Boston, just resigned last night, was not a friend to the Black community in Boston. In fact, some might argue that the Black community under Mayor Marty Walsh than any recent mayor in the city of Boston.
I'm sorry, it kind of faded out.
So that
Did
needs
you
to
say the Black community has what
has not has fared worse
under the
under
leadership?
the Mayor Marty Walsh, who just became Secretary of Labor. We need to communicate that to President Biden. We need to communicate to President Biden that Black life in Boston is not at parity, and there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be racial reparations, and there needs to be reconciliation in a city that claims to be the cradle of liberty. 20 million people come through Faneuil Hall each year, and 20 people are told lies about the connection of that building to a slave owner, a white supremacist. Something that needs to stop. So I think that if we're going to get better, if we're going to improve Boston in terms of its profile across the nation, then we need to be honest about Boston's racial past in order to make progress forward. So that's the work that we're set about doing. And again, we're taking inspiration from cities like New Orleans, who've addressed this issue around Confederate statues and streets named after white supremacists. So we're moving forward on a very, very important dialogue that needs to happen.
I'm so excited for you and for the work that you're doing. I'm so honored just to be able to know you and be able to be in the company of greatness, because I also felt like this. I also got the same vibe when we were doing the work in Take 'em Down NOLA, that the folks who I was around, they were phenomenal in their ethic, their work ethic, being driven for change. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I see the same thing happening in Boston,
Yeah.
But I tell you that,
Well, I don't necessarily. I wouldn't put myself in the category of great.
yeah,
I'm a regular. I'm a
we
regular
never do.
activist.
We don't do
I'm a
that.
regular,
I don't
but
either.
but I but I but I but I appreciate what you're saying. But
Yeah.
I'm a regular activist fighting for social justice.
Yes.
I think you might agree with this, that this whole issue around addressing these symbols around these racist symbols around our nation is another part of the civil rights movement.
It is.
I think so. I think you would agree with that.
Yes.
It is an extension of it. So I
Yes.
find myself very humbly in that legacy of speaking truth to power, so that we create a true. This is Dr. King used to talk about a beloved community, a multiracial democracy, and each of us, and generation after generation, we're obligated to walk in that legacy and work in that legacy. So I humbly think of myself as walking tradition as you are in New Orleans, as others are in Selma and Baltimore and Charlottesville. We're just trying to create a democracy in a way that it's really intended to be, for our children and our grandchildren, the next generation in a country where there is freedom, where there is a multiracial democracy, and we all share equally in the economic prosperity and the cultural prosperity. We share equally in terms of our ability to raise our children without fear of being shot down by the police. These are very, very important things that Black and white people must work towards during this generation, so that we create a better America and a more substantial democracy.
And I tell you that I feel like before we can get equality, we have to be purposeful about receiving it, because right now it's not going to happen by itself. And if we sit quietly while those who are oppressing and wait for them to say, you know what, we're going to stop doing this bad thing to Black people because they deserve to be able to participate and benefit and gain just like we have from our commerce, from our just from our equitable opportunities. Come on now. We're gonna have to force that to happen.
Yes.
Because people who are benefiting from it, they're not gonna change themselves. That's what we've been doing for so long. We've been waiting for them to say, hey, we're like, hey, look at us over here. We're drowning. But nobody comes. They can sit because they're sitting on the beach. What do they care if we're out in the ocean drowning? So and it's because of the work that we do that makes it become an issue. If we don't say anything, then they won't say anything, because that's what's been happening.
Yes, and there's the famous Frederick Douglass quote that power doesn't concede anything without demand.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we follow in that legacy. What was just so wonderful to hear recently through you and through my conversation with others in New Orleans is that as you were involved in this campaign around Take Them Down, that you marched from Conway into the French Quarter, which is the heart of your tourism in the city.
Did we?
All these Black people and all these white people.
We shut it down.
That's what we're talking about. And that follows in the tradition of what Douglass was talking about. Speaking truth to power and demanding equity, demanding fairness, and demanding that your voice be heard. You went to the heart of the matter. Thousands, I didn't see it, but I heard that there were thousands of protesters. Going through that area where all those white tourists from all across the globe were
shut it down.
Were celebrating.
We shut it down. Yeah. And they were so afraid. They were terrified. We could see the terror in their faces. First of all, we knew it was going to be, we knew a lot of people were coming, but we actually had no idea how many people were going to be there until we actually showed up. And then along the way, when people realized, when they saw our signs and saw what we were fighting for, they joined in the march.
Yes.
So
yes.
It just continued to grow and grow and grow. It was a lot. I saw a lot of powerful things, but also during that process, I saw some things that weren't really good, because I saw a young woman who was a security guard, and we were going to a protest in the we were going to sit in at a board meeting for the New Orleans Convention Center, and a young woman who was a security guard said something to us. Myself and maybe about 3 or 4 others were going in, and she said, "Well, I don't see what all the fuss is about. I don't see why y'all doing all of that because it don't matter no way. Long as I could come and make my money, y'all hurting me." And it really kind of touched my heart with
Yeah.
sadness that she could be so
Yeah.
complacent and not even realize the scope of what we were doing. But I couldn't
Hmm.
really get into it with her at the time to try to educate her on why this movement was so important to her and her children, or maybe the future children, her future
Hmm.
grandchildren, why that was so important. But
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
afterwards, when we had the march from the from Congo Square to where they sold slaves from at Congo Square through the French Quarter where we shut it down, I hope that she would be one of the people who would see how important that it was, and that she would be able to learn from that. And I mean, I tell you, to
Yeah.
see how so many people tried to marginalize what we were doing at the time, it was only because we were committed to it
Yeah.
that it continued, because all while we were doing it,
Yeah.
we were trying, they, just as much as we were trying to do it, we were also being bombarded with uh dialogue like, "Oh, don't do that." Just like I found out later, which made me go back and do the research, that when Dr. King was doing what the work that he was doing, there were many people
That's right.
who gave him
That's
the
right.
absolute blues and saying things like he was making it harder for black people. Why he want me to walk? I got to go
That's
to
right.
work. He want me to walk to work, so that kind of thing. And I find that
That's right.
still
Yeah.
happens. It still happens. But when our president hires someone who has no track record of economic equality for marginalized people, that is a disgrace. And I'm sorry, but that's
That's right.
way up on my mind. So my next step is like, well, what are we gonna do about it? What are the next steps? That I want to ask you about. I also want to talk about some next steps for the listening audience of the Treeshakers. Whenever someone hears this show and watches and engages in our conversation, I want them to be able to have some takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to emphasize something that you said was really important as you referenced Dr. King and the Montgomery boycott movement. So many people uh, in Montgomery and outside of Montgomery during the time thought that that was just symbolism. Why do we need to fight for um, place seating on a bus when there are more urgent things to be thinking about? And Dr. King and those leaders in Montgomery understood that the symbolism had its own power, that the Montgomery boycott and the symbolism of Rosa Parks ignited the nation's consciousness and created the modern civil rights movement. So even symbolic acts that some people may not understand at the time, those things are so important, and we got to keep teaching uh, our people and teaching white people learned a lot from the tenacity and the dignity of that symbolic struggle in Montgomery around
Yeah,
bus seating
yeah.
patterns,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing I wanted to mention, which I took note just talking to people in New Orleans, was the place, the position, the power positions that white people can play in this movement,
Yes.
even as blacks push for
Change.
change. You
Mm-hmm.
had the group European Descent in
Yes.
New Orleans.
Yes. Yes.
White people who who were brave enough to stand with their Black brothers and sisters around the principle of equality and the principle of opposing white supremacy. That's very important. So we want to continue to invite our allies who are white to join us in this very important period of our nation. I think the death of Trayvon Martin and then Michael Brown and other Blacks over the last 10 years has created a new consciousness, the Black Lives Matters movement consciousness. And we are obligated to feed into that and to build on to that to create something better for the nation. So I would encourage your listeners, your Treeshakers listeners, to first pray for us. Pray that we continue to walk in the right path and that we make right decisions, and that we continue to show courage in the face of adversity. And I encourage your listeners to join us. You can go to the New Democracy Coalition webpage, the New Democracy Coalition. That's www.newdemocracycoalition.org. On that page, Kim, your listeners will find a petition that they can sign in support of changing the name of Faneuil Hall. That petition, once it's signed, it goes to all the Boston City councilors in the city. That signature goes to the current mayor. So those people, those policymakers, those elected officials are immediately aware that there are people, even in Boston, who are invested in the struggle for racial equality in Boston. So I encourage your listeners to do that. There is also an opportunity for Treeshakers to donate to our movement.
And the radio station here at WHIV won't allow us to do direct fundraising.
Okay.
Because we also have only for the radio station, right? But but we can absolutely go to the website, the New Democracy Coalition.org, right?
Yes.
The New Democracy Coalition.org.
So you can go to that
and look there on how you can donate and how you can contribute and how you can participate, because everybody has something that they can do, even if it's to the older people. If you're not on, anybody who is not on social media, you can still tell someone to go to the New Democracy Coalition.org. You can tell someone to go to that page. You know folks that's online, you know folks that are doing social media. So you reach out to your circles. Our circles are important. Our circles are important. Our circles are our friends, our family, our children, neighbors. That's our circle. So reach out to your circle, because guess what? We started that work here in New Orleans, but we still have a lot more to do. And none of us are free until we all are free. So if you're suffering in Boston, we're not free here in New Orleans. We're not free, because racism is like a cancer. If you don't stop it out, it's going to keep growing. If you don't treat it, if you ignore it, it's going to keep growing and thriving. It's going to until it kills you. So we know that racism is like a cancer. I said it. Take it. We all have to. We all have to stand up for it. You know. We do. We do.
Yes.
We do.
And I know we're coming to the end of the hour, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the great work that you're doing in the city, Kim. Community recallers.
Yeah.
It is so important that we're mindful of accountability. The accountability that elected officials have towards us. So often we elect them, and those elected officials leave to do anything that they can take money from anybody that they want to, that they can make decisions without the people who elected them.
That's
It's
right. That's
important that
right.
we create institutions. It's important that we create institutions like yours,
Community
hold
recallers.
officials
Yeah.
accountable.
Hold them
That's
accountable.
right. So
We
so I
have to
want to
hold them accountable.
so I'd like to applaud you in the work you're doing, and I look forward to learning more from you and doing what you do up here in Boston to be more effective as an organization, our organization.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with you guys also. And whenever you have your community meetings, we want to come in and show support by just being there and being able to listen. Being able to listen. And we're going to be at the ready because we may have to have a national movement in Boston to make this happen. And there's some things that we can do before we go there. We can have everybody in the entire United States to call the Bostonian
Yes.
council
Hmm.
people and say, "Hey, the leadership of the Boston Council, I have no hesitation about knowing the importance of being able to do that. They're not ready for how we roll here in New Orleans. They ain't ready for that in Boston. They don't even want to know. Because guess what? My city council members listen to the Treeshakers show every time it comes on the air. They in tune. They in tune. And matter of
Hmm.
fact, show you about the
Hmm.
importance of political accountability. We had to send out a press statement just last night. We sent out a press statement because a council member went over to a citizen's house in another district and they got into a confrontation. But he had no business to go to this man's house. But he also sits on what's called, we have political PACs. We have PACs here in New Orleans. And I mean, they are all powerful. And one in particular, this guy was also a candidate in a congressional race when the councilman went over to his house. And the councilman is the campaign manager for this guy's opponent, right? So how does that
Yeah.
look? And he did that. And guess what? Went
Yeah.
before a judge to talk because he filed wanted a restraining order against the council person. So who we elect has everything to do with justice. Check this out. The
That's right.
clerk of court, who was also a member of this PAC, this political action committee. The clerk of court. The clerk of court determines what judge hears the case. Picture they send it to a judge who also donated $8,000 to this political action committee. She donated $8,000, refused to recuse herself from the case, saying, "No, I could judge fairly, but the guy who she's ruling on is a leader. The council person is a leader in this political action committee that she gave $8,000 to. Does that look fair?" And guess what? All of these people are black. All of these people are black, Kevin. So our
Hmm. Hmm.
oppression,
Hmm.
the oppression, when we don't nip it out by starting out with changing the name on Faneuil Hall, when we don't start out with allowing these politicians to be held accountable for their participation,
That's right.
their silence, their participation, it equals the same thing. And keeping this
That's right.
oppressive
That's right.
monument so readily available, it leads to stuff like what we experience in here now. So I don't like the fact that I had to
Yeah.
send out a press statement about the appearance of impropriety with this black judge. I didn't like that at all.
Hmm.
And it hurts
Hmm.
me to my
Hmm.
core
Yeah.
today to think about that that's what I had to do. But the work has to be done. The work has to be done, Kevin. So, and it's not always pretty. It's not always fun.
No.
It's not always powerful
No,
because
it's not. But right. It's not, but we're committed to the work, right?
Yeah.
We're committed we're committed to Dr. King's vision, Malcolm X's vision, and so many people in the grassroots who have a vision of the beloved community, where we find racial equity and fairness. I just want to thank you for being part of this show, and I hope I get to come on many more times to dialogue with your audience and somehow become an unofficial member of the Black community in New Orleans. I think would make me
Yeah.
prouder
You
than to be
you
associated
are.
with the activists and the leadership there. Yeah.
Oh, you are, Kevin, because you are bridging one of those huge gaps that we have in doing this work, and that is we have to go across state lines also, and we have to be purposeful about that. So you bring that to the table, and
Mhm.
you, my dear friend, are officially a tree shaker because you are a tree
There you
shaker.
go.
We're not
Yeah.
giving you anything. You have earned this title. You have earned the title of a tree shaker. And so that means that you automatically go into the groove of um, the tree shaker of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, because we're gonna be
Thank
doing
you.
that this year in 2021. We're gonna have a tree shaker of the year. So
Let's do it. Let's do
congratulations
it.
to you for being a nominee, and we'll see where that goes for you, my brother. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us the New Democracy Coalition, everybody,
Thank
at
you.
the newdemocracycoalition.com. Check them out on Facebook.
Hmm.
All righty. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Become a friend. Yeah. Yeah. Friend. Yes. Friend me on Facebook, Kevin Peterson, and we'll link you into New Democracy that way also. Thank you, Kim. I look forward to coming back on again.
Okay, Kevin. I'm looking forward to it too, my brother. We'll be talking again soon.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye. Stop.